Hello, welcome to week 5. Week 5, we're continuing our focus on the client worldview as we're going to be doing over the next couple weeks. And so this week we are looking at chapter 7 and 8 on Latinx clients and Native American clients of Native American descent. So I'm going to go ahead and nope. I'm going to try and share my screen. There we go. Okay. So here we are, chapter 7, culturally responsive counseling for clients of Latinx descent. It is important to note that Latinx is a relatively newer term that gets away from the gender binary of Latino and Latina. And while it is more inclusive in that way, there are often individuals who do not prefer Latinx, who really prefer the Latino or Latina form of this word. So just kind of keep that in mind. So some background on the chapter, and then we get into the learning objectives of the chapter. These are the specific CACREP standards that this chapter is meeting as far as specific client worldview. And so the chapter gets a little bit into how we explore, engage in introspection and reflection as counselors. And so it says the counseling profession is unique. It's a field where we're often challenged to go beyond what we're taught and constantly update our knowledge and strategies and all of that based on who we're working with. And remembering that every client is a unique individual in and of themselves, we're always going to have to kind of be on our toes in a way. And so ultimately, being in this profession requires a lot of self-awareness. So how do we engage in self-reflection and introspection so that we can have that self-awareness and recognize ways in which our biases may be playing out in the work that we do, and try to bracket that or minimize that. So often when we start to recognize our biases and things like that, we will need to seek additional training, consultation with another clinician, things like that. And so some of the important pieces are to be authentic, to be open to the reflection, have a permanent essence, and be able to articulate it in words are the components of increasing our self-awareness, and then ultimately kind of doing whatever it is that we need to do to challenge anything that might be coming up for us. So this is some more information on engaging in those processes and the recognition of the need for metacognition. So how do we think about how we think is very important. Some additional information on that, and different techniques to utilize metacognitive strategies. And ultimately, when we're in sessions, we may need to engage in that here and now processing immediately in that moment and detect any countertransference that may be coming up. And again, making corrections as we need to. So some specifics about the history, values, and culture. The Hispanic ethnicity in Americas dates back to the Spanish discovery of Nueva España and the subsequent early encounters with indigenous people. And so later the addition of Africans by enslaving individuals and transporting them to this continent contributed to the development of a unique Hispano legacy. And so the culture is often associated with Spanish colonial history and Mexico. However, individuals from South and Central America and the Caribbean have also been altering the culture. And so it's a nice blend and mixture of lots of different backgrounds and sources. Mexicans have traditionally been the largest nationality among the Hispanic community, followed by Puerto Ricans and Cubans. And Mexicans account for 58.5% of the Hispanic populations, Puerto Ricans 9%, and Cubans 3.5%. This is according to the 2000 census. They have significantly increased throughout the years, with Dominicans accounting for 2.2% and Salvadorians and Colombians 1% each. The remaining tend to be from Latin America, the Caribbean, and Spanish immigration. According to Lycia, it was only in the 1960s that the individuals from former Spanish colonies in the United States and Spain emerged to represent a new and more distinct ethnic or racial group. And so unlike other racial classifications now used in the United States, the Latino classification is the only one to be considered an ethnic group and the only one established without respect to race or aesthetics of its members. And so again, because it's created from multiple different cultures and backgrounds and ethnicities, races, it's sort of its own unique culture. And so, for example, when you fill out forms that ask for demographics, also, it often will ask for your racial identity and then have a separate question that says Hispanic or non-Hispanic origin. And so, ultimately you can identify as white and Hispanic or Black and Hispanic, or, and so it has its own specific unique classification in that way. And so 24% of the group members use a pan-ethnic moniker to identify themselves, while 69% believe they do not have a shared cultural background. So the emergence of Latinx during the early 2000s, they wanted to kind of move away from that gender distinction. And so Latinx replaced Latino and Latina, and it is often supported by individuals in the LGBTQ communities. But because there is that male-female binary deeply rooted in the Spanish language, Spanish tends to lack neutral nouns because things tend to be classified. So it can be really difficult because it breaks that traditional grammar that we see in the Spanish languages. But it's used more common in like social media and academic writing and things like that. And again, it's not broadly desired or accepted. So some mental health considerations. And so typically, so looking at the research that they identified here, there are some impediments that prevent people from healthcare access and inequalities that exist that create a barrier. There's also acculturative stress, poverty, bad housing, inadequate transportation, abuse, trauma, language hurdles, social isolation, and prejudice that are some unique obstacles faced by individuals in this community. And so it often will lead to mental health issues such as despair, anxiety, alcohol, and substance abuse. But many Latinos throughout this study specifically revealed that they did not seek treatment because of stigma associated with seeking treatment. So like an added layer of barriers or lack of access as well. And then I think one of the important pieces noted at the bottom, which consistently has been a difficulty across our country, is that even in situations where someone may say, you know what, forget the stigma, forget the barriers, I'm going to counseling, I'm going to do this thing, there's not always culturally or linguistically appropriate options. And so like, I know I had a situation where I was working with a young person in a school, and they had like huge wait list for any counselor that could speak his language. And so I continued to work with him the best that I could, but there were so many language barriers that it was preventing us from doing the work that otherwise he could have been doing in counseling. So some information about identity development. Minority groups have unique experience in developing a self a sense of self or self-concept. They have, Latinos specifically in the US have different experiences as a minority group. It affects the person's sense of self-connection to their inner beliefs and others. And it's a complicated system of beliefs that individuals have about themselves, each of which has a corresponding value. And so counseling with Hispanics in the United States is different from from different ethnicities, is without challenges and requires an understanding of both political and economic status. So one challenge in particular is anonymity, as there are individuals who are undocumented within the country and really, have this this rational fear of records being kept or information being shared. And so that's really important. And I note that on the slide it says illegal status. I understand that they're calling the status illegal. I don't like using that term. I feel like it's more appropriate to use undocumented, but again, some people are going to kind of lean on one side or the other. So some challenges faced by the children is that while the immigrant families perhaps have suffered much and struggled to maintain themselves with dignity while being in like a new location, new country, they continue to face challenges. They didn't stop once they sort of moved. The children will often have particular challenges related to being part of like their family in the traditional culture, but then also trying to sort of fit in or acculturate to the system and everything, the environment that they're in. And so, we talk a lot about, and I don't know how much this chapter gets into it, but we talk a lot about like generational trauma and generational stress. And that definitely sees its way through. And just, a movie that I tend to talk about a lot related to mental health counseling is Encanto. And that specifically focuses on individuals of Latino descent. And so, you can kind of see the way that it can really play out through the generations and things like that. It identifies here and in your text a number of challenges with food insecurity, housing conditions, and poverty and things like that that ultimately can exacerbate or create mental health issues that maybe otherwise would not be as significant. So some issues faced by second and third generation families. Again, there may be feelings of isolation due to the separation of the origins or family connections, escaping societal discrimination, estrangement from family members that maybe, are left, quote, left behind, stressors connected to marginalization, difficulties obtaining permits to work, concerns about deportation, language and cultural obstacles, and language proficiency. And so in some cases, children are tasked to translate for parents and may be involved in situations where a child otherwise would not be appropriate for a child, but they're kind of being involved in this because of that need. Some theoretical arguments on Latinos' orientation and identity is that their interpersonal interactions, professions, academic lives are referenced in fewer studies and bodies of literature, and the influence on acculturation on personal culture is less understood because of that. And so understanding cultural values such as sympathia is a concept studied in this 2020 study where it's a preference for creating warm, emotionally satisfying social relationships while avoiding conflict and negativity, which you can see can be somewhat of a challenge in many cases. And so some preliminary evidence show that there's a validity for this specific scale, which covers two elements of a person's values, both positive and negative. And it revealed that this was positively linked with positive emotions of expressivity and dispositional positive emotion across subscales, which is a really important thing to note, again, in working with individuals that may be experiencing this or having this desire. And so if we look at the Latino culture orientation favorably connected with this, this sympathia-related positivity or warmth subscale, the samples that they looked at revealed a positive connection between those things. And so these findings implied that people who are more acculturated to mainstream American society, so these individuals were more likely to have positive correlations on the warmth personality assessment scale. And Latinos who are known for their friendly manner discovered the opposite of their undergraduate research of Latinos and European Americans. And so compared to Latino pupils, European American students tended to score higher in general on the WRM interpersonal scale. And so while Latinos are known for their warmth and openness, they demand a sense of trust and familiarity. And so it may be difficult for them to seek help with individuals that they don't have any level of connection or experience with. So looking at the help-seeking behavior and utilization of counseling, the statistics say that about a fifth of the US population will be foreign-born by 2060. And among those individuals, Latin Americans and those with Hispanic ethnicity will increase twofold and account for nearly 29% of the overall population. And so this has many implications on lots of areas, obviously, of society, but specifically looking at our profession, there are a number of implications as well. And so despite the rapid growth of Latinos, culturally appropriate therapy has been an issue, right? And you talk about this in the diagnosis class, and obviously we're talking about it here, ways in which counseling, psychology, and the helping professions, a lot of things have been normed on the majority culture, right? Like the cis, het, white males, adults, able-bodied, right? And so this poses a specific challenge here as well. A pattern can be seen in how Latinos utilize healthcare and counseling services depending on their generations. And so first-generation immigrants tend to use it less, particularly for mood and anxiety disorders, whereas second, third generations may be more likely to utilize it. Even when they recently suffered a problem, Mexican immigrants in the late 90s were hesitant to seek treatment, and Mexican and other Latinos born in the United States were more likely to have access or desire access. One foundational research on the topic of multicultural counseling competencies is Sue, and we talk about Sue and Sue a lot. They do a ton of research in this area, and their seminal work described the realities of a profession struggling to identify the needs of the, quote, minority client, as well as meet challenges of that era. And so the endeavor was not void of contradiction and resistance. It's really important that we continue to do this work and continue to, challenge ourselves to become more knowledgeable and experienced. In challenging the myths and misconceptions, in 2007, Herman projected a future where therapy competency for culturally different world would become established and widely accepted. However, even though the discipline of psychology has come a long way from the behavioral science ignorance, the gap in the multicultural competency literature continues to confirm that even decades later, this challenge continues to persist. And so consequently, recent literature affirms that perhaps the obvious hindrances are the limitations of the theories, models, and research, in addition to the need for consensus of an accurate definition of what culturally sensitive concepts would be. Hi. Yep. Okay, so this was built, the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies that we talked about in the intro class was built upon by Sue and their initial multicultural counseling competencies. And it provides counselors with a framework as well as social justice perspectives into the work that we really need to be doing. So here is a clinical case scenario. You can pause the recording at this time to read it over and consider the discussion questions at the bottom. So how do we craft an advocacy agenda? Social justice was included as one of the essential professional principles, as evidenced by the advocacy competencies. Social justice has become increasingly present inclusion in the counseling profession, and we need to identify essential elements like training, supports, things like that that really can help us to move forward as individuals in the profession as well as the profession as a whole. So looking more specifically again at children, adolescents, and young adults, counseling competencies have extended their services and are reaching more children and adolescents. But individuals, particularly of Latino descent, but also like minority students in general, have often been overlooked or have their needs overlooked. And they tend to seek those services at a lower rate because of many different factors, as previously discussed. But more ethnic minorities are pursuing higher education than any other period in history. And so this can often be helpful in connecting to like college counseling centers and learning more about the acceptance of mental health needs. This is a little bit more specific, some research on working with adolescents. Mostly just kind of some statistics here. Again, you can pause the recording and take a look at them. Specifically with adults, couples, and families. There are unique obstacles due to potentially complicated contextual circumstances like higher risk of social isolation, distance from family, a collectivist culture, and so on. And so working with individuals will often involve families, and working with families can sometimes be a challenge depending on who is able to be present, things like that. But family is highly regarded, or there's a tendency for close family relationships beyond the like nuclear family, so like grandparents, aunts, uncles, things like that. And so you may find yourself, if you're working with families, working with kind of a larger group or a wider range of what family sort of looks like. So here are some additional implications for clinical practice, some things that you can be considering at this point and as you move forward into the profession, and then some concluding statements from the chapter, again, that you can kind of take a look at on your own. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that so we can get into the next chapter. This slide presentation or slide deck for this chapter is much, much smaller. All right, so culturally responsive counseling for clients of Native American descent. So here is some background information. There are over 500 different tribes throughout the United States. Transmitting information historically has been through an oral tradition. There's not a ton that is written down. We're going to talk a little bit about a clinical case scenario that's in the textbook, I believe. Let's look at 8 in here. Just taking a second. Okay. Okay, here it is, Dakota. So I will share this on the screen. So new share. All right, so here we are on this case on Dakota. So I'm going to pull this down a little bit. So it's case scenario 8.1. Again, I'm not sure if it's in your textbook. That's why I want to show it here. So pause the recording here so that you can read this section. And then once you're done this section, unpause and I'll scroll down here. So again, you can pause at this point so that you can read more about Dakota. And then I'm going to scroll down so you can see more. It's a pretty in-depth case scenario, which is pretty awesome. But again, kind of pause it so you can continue to read. Again, this is only if it's not in your textbook, so that you have access to it. Okay, you can kind of pause again to read this section. All right, and then at the bottom we have some discussion questions, which again, you can pause the recording and consider and think about how you might respond to them. All right, back to the PowerPoint. Nope, wrong PowerPoint. All right, here we go. So who is Dakota? That's the key scenario. Some cultural and spiritual values, finding one's purpose, teachings and storytellings, as I kind of mentioned, that oral tradition, the importance of ancestors and healing ceremonies and things such as this, that your textbook obviously gets into in a lot more detail than the slides do. So some acculturation conflicts, alcohol and substance abuse is sort of a known issue and concern within the population, also domestic violence and high rates of suicide. And so there's a lot that goes into this just historically with the colonization and the murders and crimes that have been and continue to be committed against this population. But also within the population, you see these things continuing, such as missing and murdered indigenous women, and honestly, not as much effort, or some believe not as much effort to address this issue. Also with alcohol and substance abuse often being pretty rampant, this idea of like kind of keeping it quiet, hiding it, not putting it out there in the open. And so unfortunately, individuals don't get the help that they need, which can lead to these increased difficulties with domestic violence and suicidality. Identity development, there's the traditional versus contemporary, and this can often be a challenging thing with young individuals, is, you know, kind of the importance of family and culture and history and ancestors, but then also like newer knowledge and systems and ways of being and things like that, and that acculturation continuum, but also addressing and assessing those levels with the client so that we can understand, again, what is important to them, what are their particular values and beliefs, and not necessarily kind of falling on what we think or assume they might be. There tends to be this desire for harmony and healing. There may be specific treatment preferences that we should try to understand with the clients and adhere to them as much as possible. There may be collaboration with spiritual healers and leaders within the community. Excuse me. One of my supervisees works in a treatment center, and you know, she will often be in communication with individuals from reservations and tribes and things like that, in working with individuals that she has in the residential treatment, because it really is that collectivist culture, and really trying to support the individuals from the perspective of everyone in the community as much as possible. So your textbook obviously gets into culturally responsive practices. So what do we draw from the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies? First, which is repeated constantly, is that cultural humility. I don't know everything. I'm not going to know everything. And so I need to be in a process of continual learning. Traditional values in the theoretical framework. So how do I not rely so heavily on some of, again, those theories and modalities and things like that from again, that Eurocentric kind of view, and kind of focus on the values of the community, being modesty, being overdoing, right? Like being present or being in general is seen as better than, more than, doing, right? And the connection that is often so present, or helping to facilitate the connection that may be missing. So crafting an advocacy agenda, learning about the history and the disparities, learning about movement for rights and protections, and what are some specific areas that advocacy for mental health can be utilized. Specifically with children, adolescents, and young adults, some implications for counseling, addressing cultural identity and the degree of acculturation of the client, allowing time for trust and to develop before focusing on a problem, allowing extended family or other important people to participate, as we kind of already touched on, allowing flexible session start and end times, matching the client's nonverbals, paying attention to what you're kind of seeing and picking up, and what you might be putting out there as well. Respecting silence, which I know sometimes can be a challenge, especially for early practitioners, but being able to really give that space as needed. Using strategies that create practical solutions and demonstrating respect for their culture. So looking at adolescents, couples, and families, one of the most significant areas impacting the adults is substance abuse. But each family has its own unique rules, traditions, roles, and protocols in general, but specifically around this issue in mental health as well. And so that can have a lot of implications on the work that we do. And so some 3 important C's: context, comfort, and communication are key. And then kind of asking about different cultural customs that may be unique to this group, this tribe, or the client themselves, their family, things like that. And so the slide deck ends with a thank you. And if you have any questions about either of these chapters, please just let me know. But otherwise, you'll see another recording from me that will focus on week 6, where we continue to discuss the client's world view.